Not a good week at all for Tottenham Hotspur. They've been launched out of 2 cup competitions, despite the fact that their manager said earlier that he always wins something in his second year. Of course, they're still in the Europa League.
I always win things in my second year.
There we go. Thank you very much indeed. But Rory Jennings, I mean, it's not a surprising result in my eyes, them losing to Aston Villa. I wasn't surprised that they got knocked out by Liverpool either. Ange Postecoglou, once again, going back to the fact that they have injuries. They do have 11 senior players out. But again and again and again, do you feel like he's leaning on this excuse now far too much?
Yeah, of course he is. Because it is an excuse. Look, all teams suffer injuries. Don't get me wrong, I understand that they have a crisis, but part of the reason that they have a crisis is Ange Postecoglou's doing. Like, the reason that their 2 centre-halves are so chronically injured, for example, is partly because of the tactics that Ange Postecoglou likes to play. You know, if you have centre-halves doing 60-yard sprints 5 times a game because they're being caught in an awkward position and someone's got in behind them, they're going to get injured. Equally, the reason why they are chronically injured is because they were rushed back. Do you remember the game against Chelsea where both centre-halves went off in the first half because Postecoglou managed that situation totally incorrectly? It's ridiculous, Olly.
Do you know what else as well, Rory, is that you could have seen this coming at the start of this season, because if you remember last season, Spurs weren't even in European competition. And they were still having these issues. Mickey van der Ven still had these issues picking up his hamstring problem, the other injuries across the pitch as well. If you add into that a European campaign, it was only ever going to get this bad, which surely feeds into the fact that this is Ange trying to blame bad luck. But actually, like you've pointed out, this is to do with, surely, the way he trains and the way he plays as well.
It's to do with him, his whole approach, his whole setup, his whole team. Everything around the Postecoglou system causes these problems. And I understand why Tottenham fans have a gripe with ENIC. I understand why they are not supportive of Daniel Levy. And to be totally frank with you, I back them in that. I think that Tottenham are a huge club that deserve more. I do genuinely believe that, despite the fact that I'm not always very kind about them because they are massive rivals of the team that I do support. However, it's so poor the way that he has managed this situation. There are so many mistakes that are totally traceable to Ange Postecoglou himself. And I think you can trace it right back to him being given the job because, like I say, ENIC get loads wrong. They deserve no sympathy whatsoever. They haven't invested the way that they didn't invest when Mauricio Pochettino had them in a European Cup final. It was absurd, like absolutely mind-boggling, really, when you think back, isn't it? You get to a European Cup final and you don't buy anyone the following summer. It's like ridiculous. Yeah. But Postecoglou has been backed. These are his players. These are his tactics. And this is the worst Tottenham team of my lifetime, I think. Like, do you know the nadir of Tottenham being poor? Tottenham fans don't like to admit it, because they love Ozzy Ardiles. So the nadir is seen as being Christian Gross. Okay. I think you could argue that it was the Ardiles team, actually, but let's just agree that they're correct. And it was the Christian Gross team. This is worse than that.
Well, in terms of league position, it is.
But also in terms of feeling, in terms of play, like, you know,
and in terms of culture.
In terms of culture, also in terms of, like, star players. Like, think about Tottenham teams when I was a kid. They didn't always win. They didn't always succeed. But they had some glorious footballers, like footballers that were very in keeping with their tradition as well. Players like Jurgen Klinsmann, Ilya Dumitrescu, David Ginola, Les Ferdinand. Like exciting, clever footballers. Teddy Sheringham's another great example. And whether they succeeded or failed in terms of silverware, they were Tottenham. This is a ridiculous situation, Ollie. I've got Tottenham fans trying to tell me that James Maddison's a good player. Like, it's just ridiculous. Yeah. Like, he's not good. He's not very good. He's not a winning footballer by any stretch of the imagination.
Again, when you go back to Ange and his comments, and he keeps saying, look, when we get our players back, promise we're going to be good. Honestly, we will. You know, we've seen it before. Do you remember that time ages ago when I won 8 in a row when I first joined? That was ages ago, by the way. And the other thing about this season as well is that he can keep blaming injuries, but there have been games where they have had a fully fit, if not almost fully fit, squad and still put in poor performances. The key example for me is Crystal Palace. Lost 1-0. Palace couldn't buy a win. That was their first win of the season. They also had the game, I think, against Newcastle, where they had a very good team. Look, they were quite unlucky that day, had chances, but ultimately they lost it because Newcastle were able to take advantage of a high line, which essentially comes down to Ange being stubborn once again, and able to take advantage of that and went on to win that game. I just see him as the issue, and I really am stunned.
No, but it is that
he's still in that.
But it is that.
role.
Also, and you can trace this right back to him being given the job. Now, what I'm about to say will be frowned upon massively by our friends north of the border. And for the record, I'm not somebody who sneers at Scottish football at all. Like, I rate Celtic in what they mean worldwide. I think Glasgow Rangers are one of the biggest clubs in the world, like I genuinely do. And I think that the tradition of Scottish football is impressive. But let's be totally honest. There isn't an example of a Scottish manager that has done the business in the Premier League aside from the obvious. Like, everyone goes, well, look what Fergie did at Aberdeen. You're like, yeah, all right. Since then, which is what, now, 30-odd years ago, the appointment, you kind of go, okay, since then, who? And you think about the success that, say, Walter Smith had with the Teddy Bears up there. He did an amazing job, right? Absolutely amazing. Didn't he win 9 in a row? He had Everton where? Mid-table at best?
Yeah. Steven Gerrard, another example.
Yeah, Steven Gerrard. Like, there isn't exactly this trajectory of managers that do well in Scotland, and you can use that as a foundation for doing well in the Premier League. So I think you really have to ask Daniel Levy and the appointment process. I think you have to question that. And I also think that this persevering with a distinctly average manager, like, this isn't hounding a manager. This isn't unjustly criticising a manager. This is a manager who's been given ample opportunity to turn it around, ample opportunity to succeed at the club, and has proved time and time again, often via his own arrogance, that he is inept at managing in the Premier League.
Because of stubbornness as well. And I just...
Can I just point something out here as well, just before you go on? Do you know what he's done off the back of going out of the Cup? So they've gone out of 2 Cups in 3 days. The great Cup team of Tottenham, right? When the year ends in 1, Chaz and Dave, all the great Cup glory. The game's about glory as it's plastered, ironically, around the stadium, right? He's given the players a day off. You know that. You know they got 2 days off this week. And I understand they haven't got a game. You know, fixture congestion is no longer an issue when you're out of all the Cups, apart from 1. But almost on principle, you don't get launched out of 2 Cups in 3 days and be given 2 days off. Because the culture at Tottenham, it's not exactly like these players have a Lutheran work ethic. What do you think they're doing? Do you think they're doing extra drills?
I don't know. The only thing I can think is that once again, you know, obviously with their injuries, he's there saying, look, these players have played so many different games, etc. Even though they've lost them, that they maybe need to take a break from training. Maybe that's been the issue as well, Rory. Maybe that's
if there's ever an answer to solving problems at a football club, let's do less training.
Yeah, but you say that, but we've just talked about their injury record and that potentially being Ange's fault. So are they training too much?
Being given the day off, then you can go in and you can. Mate, you should almost be going in as punishment. You should almost be told 8 o'clock in the morning we're in. Yeah. Like, whether you're doing drills and running is a different question. But you could certainly be in studying your inept performance on video. Let's have a look at each individual player's performance here.
Yeah, by the way, I mean, I was actually thinking just then, what a week for Matthias Tell as well. I mean, what a few weeks, because I mean, he's you know, quite publicly almost, you know, projected them pretty much, hasn't he? He said he didn't want to go, and then eventually he's joined the club, and now he's out of 2 cup competitions to get his first goal against Aston Villa. But I do want to ask you about that as well, because you made quite an interesting point there, saying that as much as Tottenham fans have a right to have a gripe with ENIC and Levy, and I do agree with you there, doesn't it seem ironic to you that finally, when they seem to have learnt their lesson to some extent, and started to back a manager, it is probably the
wrong one.
In recent years, the wrong one.
If you're going to throw money at a manager, as ENIC have done with regard to Postecoglou, it has to be Pochettino at Tottenham. You know, they loved him. He had a great rapport with the fans. It has to be maybe Conte because of his... Like, he's a serial trophy winner. He wins the league everywhere he goes. Or Jose Mourinho, arguably one of the best managers to have ever lived. In fact, not arguably, one of the best managers to have ever lived. How on earth you decide that the manager that you are going to financially back is Ange Postecoglou? It defies gravity. Doesn't make any sense to me. And they're now in a situation where it's Europa League or bust. And his arrogant prediction about the second season is really going to bite him, because they're not going to win that. Like, they're not. And ultimately, it's all going to crumble down around him. And he is responsible. They can't really give the blame to anyone else.
Do they get rid now, or just chance their arm, see if that prophecy comes true? And by the way, he said he always wins things in his second year. To be fair, he didn't say I will win something with Tottenham.
No, that was the implication. Don't do that.
I know
Ollie.
that.
No,
I'm just saying. I just want to clear that up.
You're being very generous there. No, and I appreciate that you have a responsibility to do that, considering the privilege that we have.
I'm
on this
looking
platform.
after you, Rory.
You're not looking after me. There is I'm big enough and ugly enough to look after myself. The implication, the words that you say are correct. But the implication was, I will win the silverware this year. I'm convinced that was the implication. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, yeah. That is fair to say. And can you see them doing it? I just can't.
I mean,
even if they get that team back, they're not. They're just. I'll be very, very impressed if they do it. But I think the main issue here, right, even if they do go on to win the Europa League, is that I think you would still see the same problems next season. You'd see the same injury issues, the same excuses, the same games where Ange struggles to adapt. And that's why, for me, I just cannot see why he would be the manager to take it forward. I also think you're seeing the same culture at Tottenham, whether that's to do with the ownership or the manager, I'm not sure. But surely, the only way really to try and fix that is a change of attitude from the board, but also to hire a manager who understands that the culture at Tottenham needs to change as well. That's the only way I can see that being fixed.
Yes, and then now we're going around in circles because Tottenham fans will tell you, and they are far more educated about their club than I am, but they will tell you that the culture will not change with Daniel Levy at the helm.
Yeah.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.